Hi friends, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, hi, my name is Olivia, I'm a writer, and I just spent about the last 2 years studying creative writing through Pacific University's Master of Fine Arts program. And in that program, I was expected to read about 20 books per semester, so 80 books total. I think honestly, of the entire program, the reading list was the most challenging part for me just because we were trying to get through so many books so quickly. And I think because of the way the semester was laid out, it did end up being like a book every 5 or 6 days. So today what I wanted to do is I wanted to go through each and every one of those 80 books that I read and kind of give you a mini review of each one. And then, this is kind of new for me, but I wanted to do a tier ranking. So I've made a tier ranking list that I will be using and hopefully screen recording. This is gonna work some magic here. It's gonna be very, very fancy. And the reason I wanted to do this rather than like a traditional 1 to 5 star ranking is because all of these reviews are really highly subjective to what I was learning from these books at the time. So we have like a 5-tier system. So first is not for me, thanks. That's my lowest category. One and done, that basically just means I read it once, I'm glad I read it once, but I don't really think I would read it again. Third is that I would read it again. Fourth is it's earned a hallowed place upon my shelves. And fifth, the highest praise of all, is it is a masterpiece in my eyes. So that's kind of the tier ranking system I'm going to be using here. And then in addition to the tier ranking things, I've kind of also categorized all 80 of the books into 5 different genres. And I'm using the term genre very, very loosely here because books don't always fit really neatly into one category or another, you know. Genres are more like guidelines than actual rules. So first up, we have literary fiction, and for the purposes of this video, literary fiction really just means any fiction that's not fantasy. Second, we have short story collections. Third, poetry. Fourth, books on the craft of writing. And then fifth, fantasy. And that includes sci-fi, dystopia, kind of a smattering of just anything that's not really considered to be in the normal world, you know? Alright, I think that's enough of the introductory stuff for now, so give this video a like if you enjoy it and subscribe to my channel for more bookish writing content like this. Without any further ado, let's jump into this video. Make yourself a cup of tea, get comfy. Here we go. Okay, so leading the charge, we are beginning with all of the literary fiction books. Okay, so the first book I've got here is The Virgin Suicides. One of the biggest writing things I learned from this book is this term called defamiliarization, and Charles Baxter actually coined this term, but it's basically defined as making the familiar strange and the strange familiar. So, for example, The Virgin Suicides takes place in kind of your average ordinary suburban neighborhood in the 70s, something we're all really familiar with, but the way he describes everything makes it seem very gothic and kind of strange, and it's more interesting to read for that reason. But for me, as a fantasy writer, what I learned from this is that as I introduce characters into an unfamiliar world, I need to anchor the strange and unfamiliar things in metaphors that are very familiar to readers, so it feels more accessible. So that's what I learned from this book. So yeah, I think for this, I would put this book solidly in the middle. I would read this book again. The next up, we have Clara and the Sun. I guess you could technically call this book speculative fiction. So Joy Clarkson from the podcast Speaking with Joy, she actually did a book club on this book over the summer that I was reading it. So Clara and the Sun takes place in a futuristic world where there are artificial friends, so kind of like robots with artificial intelligence, and they're designed to be companions for children. But what was most interesting to me about this book is that we have like an artificial intelligence, a non-human narrator, but the entire book is an exploration of what it means to be human and what it means to love. Really interesting book, really beautiful. So yeah, I think I'd put this one solidly in the middle as well. So the next one we have on our list is The Road by Cormac McCarthy. Cormac McCarthy kind of has this like legend status in the writing world, especially in the MFA program I was a part of. Anyway, he's a very unusual writer. He doesn't really use much punctuation at all except for like the bare basics, comma, period, question mark. So this book takes place in kind of a futuristic post-apocalyptic world where this father and son are trying to survive out in the wild. They're trying to travel through kind of a burned landscape of America to get to the coastline. So it's very much a tale of survival. So this one is very much an exploration of how to survive with hope in a world where it really seems like there's nothing left to hope for. So this is a really beautiful story. It is kind of dark, so there's that. I would probably put this, I don't know. I'd probably put it in the middle category too. Alright, so next up we have another book that my advisor recommended I read, and that is Sing Unburied Sing by Jesmyn Ward. So this story is set in 21st century Mississippi, and it's very much a portrait of a family struggling to live and love in the midst of poverty and drug use. What I found really interesting about this book is the way she transitions between the past and the present. So there is this kind of struggle as a writer to dance between the present timeline and the past when you're integrating, flashbacks or in-scene memories, whether that's just a brief flashback that takes place in the middle of a current scene or an entirely like a shift to the past, and how to kind of dance between those timelines, especially if there's multiple timelines going on. So I really found this book helpful in learning how to navigate memory in prose. And if I were to rank this one, I really enjoyed it. I learned a lot from this book, but I don't think I would reread it. I think it's kind of a one and done for me, so I'll put that one there. Okay, so next up we have All the Light We Cannot See by Anthony Doerr. Anthony Doerr is one of my favorite writers of all time, and this is the book that really cemented it for me. All the Light We Cannot See takes place in World War II, and it kind of follows two different narrators. So first we follow Marie. She's a blind girl living in Paris under the Nazi occupation of France, and it's also narrated by a German boy who is really skilled at fixing radios. He's kind of recruited into the Nazi regime, and so the story kind of dances between the two of them, and then we kind of follow to see how their paths intertwine over the course of the book. So, masterpiece of a book. This, I think I mentioned this in a previous video, but I'm definitely planning to do a breakdown of Anthony Doerr's prose. One of you guys commented that his writing is luminous, and I love that word because that perfectly describes his prose. But anyway, I'm going to be planning to do another video essay on this in the next few months, so hang around for that. As far as what I learned about writing from this book has a lot to do with the horrors of war in general, but he anchors it in such specific, really touching moments between characters. So he makes it feel very accessible, even though it's huge themes he's dealing with, he anchors it into really small things. I feel like the three biggest things I learned from him are his very unusual verb choices, striking detail, and then also he uses really unusual metaphors that draw you into the scene. Anyway, Anthony Doerr is my hero. I love his writing style, so if you haven't read this book, definitely go pick this one up. Where is this one? We gotta put this, yeah, this is an absolute masterpiece. It's going way up there. So this is by the same author as Clara and the Sun. This is Never Let Me Go. It is speculative fiction, but rather than taking place in a futuristic world, it takes place in an alternate timeline in England in the 1990s. Kids growing up in this orphanage, but the orphanage has a really dark secret that they uncover when they're older. I don't know if I can say anything about the story without spoiling it, so I won't say anything. It has a lot to do with very complicated friendship dynamics, lots of reflections on kind of memory and mortality and reckoning with your lost youth. So this is a really good book. This one is pretty haunting. I would put this in the reread section. I would reread these ones. So this is actually a book by my very first advisor in the MFA program. Her name's Valerie Lakin, and this is her book Dream House. It's basically a very character-driven mystery novel. It has to do with kind of a house and all the various people that have lived in that house over the years, and there's kind of a murder mystery you're sort of trying to untangle through the lens of the current owner of the house, these newlyweds. So it's a very intriguing portrait of how a house is shaped by the memories it carries. So it's a great study of very subtle tension that's built throughout the book, kind of secrets that unravel between the characters. So it's fun. I bookmarked a lot of sections to it. I really enjoyed this book. As much as I enjoyed it, I don't know that I would really reread it, so I'll probably put it in the one and done category. Oh, okay, so this next one I really loved. This is Lavinia. Lavinia was the very last novel that Ursula K. Le Guin wrote. My thesis advisor, Molly Gloss, was writing partners with Ursula K. Le Guin, so she was kind of able to, it was just really fun to talk with her about her experience of seeing Le Guin write this book, because it was kind of like it was very much a final gift for her in her life. So this book is a kind of a retelling / reimagining of Lavinia's tale from the Aeneid. It's tragic, but it's also very hopeful at the same time, and I love Ursula K. Le Guin's writing style, so I learned a lot from just her prose and even just her descriptions of place. I remember when I finished this book that this one stayed with me for days and weeks after I'd finished it. So yeah, I'm gonna put this one in the fourth category. So the next book is March by Geraldine Brooks. This was a gift actually from my mother-in-law, I think. So this is a really interesting one because this is the story of Little Women, but from the perspective of their dad, who is away fighting in the Civil War. So it's a really interesting study of his encounters with slavery and racism and poverty and injustice, and a very interesting study of all the trauma that he experienced and then how he chose to carry that home and live differently with his daughters. Anyway, I was really impressed by this book, and it seems like a really hard thing to do, to weave in a classic that's beloved by so many people and then to tell a different version of it. It's a very interesting idea. So let's see, we're gonna put this in the middle again. I feel like I'm putting all the books in the middle. Next up we have A Place for Us by Fatima Farheen Mirza. This book has blown me away. I have reread this multiple times. I think I first found this book in 2019 and I have reread it. It's kind of one of those that I reread or try to reread every single year. So basically this is a story of an Indian Muslim family that live in San Francisco, and it takes place over decades. Because this book is narrated by 3 different members of the family, 3 or 4, you get a really interesting sense of how people remember events differently and how that shapes the family dynamics as they change over time. It's also a really interesting study of memory and how little moments can kind of cause a big divide later on down the road. So beautiful, beautiful story. This one, without a doubt, is up 5 stars. Incredible. Next up is Kaleidoscope. This is a book by Cecily Wong, who is also one of the faculty members at Pacific University. So it's the story of this really wealthy Chinese American family that live in New York, and they have this kind of booming business empire, and then there's something really tragic that happens that kind of ruins them all. And the youngest daughter chooses to kind of travel the world to kind of work through her grief over this tragic event. So I thought this was a really good book, and it was also really interesting. I've never seen anybody pull this off before, but she has a character death that happens mid-sentence. Yeah, like I'm still kind of reeling from the audacity of that. So it's kind of a travel story. It's also kind of a coming of age. It has a lot to do with sisterhood and grief and nostalgia. So I would put this, I don't think I would reread this one, but I really did enjoy it the first time around. Okay, so the next book is, I don't have a copy of it with me, but A Job You Mostly Won't Know How to Do by Pete Fromm. And this is another one of the faculty members at Pacific. So it's this really emotional story of a single dad who's trying to raise his newborn daughter after his wife dies in childbirth. It's kind of a slow burn book, but it's a really great depiction of found family and grief, and also on a more practical note, like the dialogue in it is really, really well done. And while I'm on it, I'm gonna also cover, where'd it go? So I'll talk about Pete Fromm's other book that I really enjoyed. So this is called If Not For This. So when I actually talked with Pete Fromm I was in one of his workshops, and he told me that this was the most challenging book that he's ever written. That's because it takes place over the course of a couple's lifetime together. So he has like giant time skips over the stuff that's already familiar to us. So he'll jump from like them being newlyweds to them expecting their first child to them expecting their second. You know, there's like giant leaps. And it almost reads like a collection of short stories that are all about the same 2 characters' lives. Yeah. Anyway, incredibly emotional book. This book is heartbreaking. A Job You Mostly Won't Know How to Do, I think I'd put that in One and Done. I don't think I reread that one, but If Not For This, I would reread for sure. That one was incredible. Okay, so the next book is Practical Magic by Alice Hoffman. I think I first found the movie about a year ago and loved it. Like, automatic new favorite movie of fall. So I kind of thought the book would be similar to the movie. It's not, and I really didn't like it at all. It's basically like a multi-generational story of women, sisters, mothers, and daughters, but I don't know, there was just a lot about it I really didn't like very much. There were multiple kind of confusing point of view shifts in the middle of the story that I just didn't vibe with, and then also the characters felt really passive to me, and I didn't particularly like any of them. They all felt pretty similar. Anyway, all this to say, I like the movie way better than the book, so I'm gonna put that might be our first 1 star. Yeah, it was just not for me. Not my favorite. So the next book on the list is Homecoming by Kate Morton. Kate Morton is one of my favorite mystery writers, and mystery is kind of a genre that I haven't really delved into very much, but a few years back, my mom and I discovered Kate Morton's books, and I think we binge read pretty much every single book of hers over the course of one summer. My favorite of hers is The Clockmaker's Daughter. I think that's her best work yet, but this one is her most recent book, and this came out, I think, last year, but this is kind of a murder mystery set in Australia. So it's about a mother and her kids who are found dead at this picnic. Decades pass and still nobody knows exactly how they died. So it's the story of this journalist who's trying to untangle exactly what led up, like what events led up to that. With this book, as with many that you'll probably notice throughout this video, it has a lot to do with the kind of interwoven past and present timelines that shed light on each other, because that's kind of the structure I'm using for the fantasy novel that I'm writing. So anyway, I really enjoyed this. If you like mystery novels, Kate Morton is an incredible author. I don't know if I'd reread this one. That's the struggle. Is like, there's some other books of hers that I enjoy a lot more than this one. So I think this might be a one and done for me. Like, I did enjoy it, but I don't know that I reread it. Is that horrible? Whatever. Moving on. Okay, so Daisy Jones and the Six. I read this book last year after watching the TV show, and again, I know this is probably horrible to say, but I did actually like the TV show a lot better than the book. So anyway, let me backtrack a little bit. Basically, this book is a fictional oral history of a 1970s rock band, kind of covering their rise to fame in the years before their breakup. So I found the cast of characters really compelling in this. I really enjoyed them all. And because there's a host, kind of a chorus of narrators with conflicting views on what exactly went down, it makes it all the more lifelike and compelling. So Taylor Jenkins Reid, in general, from what I read of her books, she seems very interested in women who are famous, or like famous women, in their public and private personas and how those are different. Anyway, it was interesting, but I think I like the show better. I don't think I would reread this one. So next up is The Falcon's Eyes by Francesca Stanfill. I think I picked this book up in a random little bookstore in Colorado while I was out there for a trip, and it was an autographed copy and it looked like a cool cover and it was like historical fiction, so I was kind of intrigued. So this story is a reimagining of 12th century France, especially women's roles during that period. So I think for me, for this book, I really enjoyed the first chapter. I thought it was really riveting and I was intrigued by the world building, but what kind of fell flat for me was the characters are promised this big emotional journey from the beginning of the book, but it didn't really feel like it fulfilled that. It just didn't feel like it lived up to all the things that it promised it would be at the beginning, if that makes sense. So this one I think is one of the more disappointing books that I read during the program. So anyway, I'll put that in the lowest category just because it just wasn't what I was hoping it would be. All right, so we're getting down to the last ones now. So An Irish Country Doctor by Patrick Taylor. This was a really cute one. This kind of gave me like Mitford vibes, or no, what's the other story? All Creatures Great and Small. That's what this reminded me of. It's kind of about this young doctor in rural Ireland who kind of apprentices under this kind of grouchy old doctor. The two of them kind of are learning from each other about life as they administer to the patients of this small town called Ballybucklebow, which is so Irish. I love it. I thought it was cute. I enjoyed it. I don't think I'd read it again. Yeah, I think I'll put it there. Anyway. And I guess I should kind of also preface that one and this next book. I was trying to learn how to write an Irish accent, so that's why I was picking up these Irish books. That's really what I was looking for out of these stories. Okay, so this next one's very similar, but it's This Is Happiness by Neil Williams. So this is a story about electricity coming to a rural town in Ireland. I felt like it's a very soulful book. It's a great exploration of people and place and has this very timeless wisdom about it. I underlined so many parts of this book. So it's kind of one of those, it kind of reminds me of like Hannah Coulter by Wendell Berry, in that it's really kind of a long and meandering story, but it's really rich with wisdom. And it has this very dry wit to it that I really enjoyed. So I'd put This Is Happiness. Yeah, I think it was up there as one of my favorites. I love this one. Okay, next is On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous by Ocean Vuong. So this is an epistolary novel, so it's a novel in letters from a Vietnamese American son to his mother. So it's a very unconventional story structure, but it has really beautiful prose in it. It deals with a lot of difficult topics like assimilation, trauma, racism, gender, addiction, war. So it's kind of a heavier book. I was personally kind of disappointed by this book. It felt like I feel like I'm gonna get destroyed for saying this, but it felt self-indulgent to me. Like it almost got lost in, it was beautiful writing, but it almost got lost in the beautiful writing. I'm gonna put this in the not for me thanks category. It just was not. It's just not a book that I would want to recommend to people. I just didn't feel like it really did what it promised to do. I don't know. Okay, so the next book is Lighthouse Keeping by Jeanette Winterson. I honestly, this was one of the first books I read for the program, and I don't remember it that well. So I remember enjoying it, but I don't really think I have a lot to say about this one, except that when my husband saw this in the pile, he thought it was a book on light housekeeping. So anyway, it follows a character called Silver who becomes apprenticed to a lighthouse keeper. I don't know, I remember it interweaving history and mythology in kind of interesting ways, but I don't think I have a lot to say about this one. So moving on. So Lighthouse Keeping, I think I would put it in the not for me category. The next story is called At Home at the End of the World by Michael Cunningham. I also don't have a lot to say about this one. I remember it being very depressing, which I realized was kind of the point. It's a story of these like boyhood friends and this woman that they live with and this kind of like unconventional family that they build together. It just was not my cup of tea. We'll put it that way. So we'll throw that over here. Next up is Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. This book. So the main character, who's never named, interestingly enough, she meets this wealthy American widower in Monte Carlo, and after about 2 weeks of knowing the guy, she decides to marry him, Disney style, and after their honeymoon, when they arrive back at his mansion in Cornwall, this place is called Manderley, she discovers that he and his mansion are both kind of haunted by the memory of his first wife, Rebecca de Winter. Super dark and moody aesthetic. It's just a very classic flavor to it, and lots of twists and turns, and I really enjoyed this one, so I'll put that one in right there. And last but certainly not least, if we can get a drum roll, we have The Secret History by Donna Tartt. So if you've been around a while, you might know this is one of my favorite books of all time, the OG dark academia novel, but it's about a group of classics students at a private university in Vermont, and these intellectual students are obsessed with the idea of transcending the ordinary to touch the divine, and they end up deciding to murder one of their friends. So you find out from page 1 who they kill. So it's kind of described as not really a whodunit, but a whydunit mystery novel. You're trying to figure out why they killed him. Totally drenched in the like psychological ramifications of murder. So picture, Crime and Punishment type vibes. But the thing is, it's not just a murder mystery or a crime novel. It's this thought-provoking and compelling picture of humanity's search for beauty and meaning and truth. It's all about like the romanticism of lost youth and the desire to live forever. Her prose is very Dickensian, it's beautiful writing style, and Donna Tartt's just such an interesting author. So yeah, definitely one of my favorite books of all time. If you haven't read this yet, check it out. Yeah, this one automatically goes in the masterpiece category. This is such a good book. I am planning to do a whole video essay on this very soon, so stick around for that this fall. Coming soon to a YouTube channel near you. Alright, so we made it. That's all the literary fiction novels that I have. So next up, we're going to dive into all of our short story collections. I didn't read a ton of short story collections, so we should be able to breeze through this pretty quickly. So we're going to start off strong with Stories of Your Life and Others by Ted Chiang. So I first watched the movie Arrival in 2020, and that movie blew my mind. So that script was based off Story of Your Life, which is the title short story in this collection. So I already knew going into it that it was going to blow my mind, but I didn't really realize how much. Every single one of these short stories is a deep dive into a subject. I have no idea how this author wrote these things. Like, the depth of knowledge in every single field was fascinating to me. So like time travel, math, physics, linguistics, pretty much like any mind-boggling field that there is probably represented by a story in this book. I really don't know how he wrote them all. Maybe this is stereotyping, but I feel like if you like Dune or Star Wars, you'll probably like this too. Although this is a lot headier than both of those. All that to say, Stories of Your Life has earned a hallowed place upon my shelves. It's genius. Okay, next up. A Good Man is Hard to Find and Other Stories by Flannery O'Connor. I really have enjoyed Flannery O'Connor. I hadn't read much of her work before this program. I felt like this was a great kind of sampler of her stories. So where would I put this one? I think I would put this, I feel like a one and done. I don't know that I would reread these stories. I enjoyed them a lot though. I feel like I have to disclaim every story I don't like very much. Next up, we have a collection of short stories by Margaret Atwood, which was Bluebeard's Egg. I felt like these were very slow burn stories that had like, I think it felt like a very feminist critique of gender roles and kind of the subtle miscommunications between men and women and how they just like, sometimes they just don't understand each other in fundamental ways. I feel like Atwood is a really gifted writer. I just don't personally resonate with her stuff very much. So I think I'd put that in the not for me category. Just like, nothing against her. I didn't personally resonate with that. So the next one I don't have with me because I read it on Kindle, but it's called The Djinn in the Nightingale's Eye. 5 Fairy Stories by A.S. Byatt. So this is a short story collection of 5 more like modern myths and fairy tales. I'm kind of noticing as we go through these that there are some of these books that I don't remember that well, and this is one of them. I remember enjoying it, but I don't know that I would reread it again. So we're just gonna let it go there for now. So the next one is Smoke and Mirrors by Neil Gaiman. This one was fun. I enjoyed this. Nicholas Was is like a 100-word short story in here, and that made me laugh out loud. It was really good. It's interesting. He's got kind of like a morbid sense of humor, but I think, yeah, these were fun. They're just very imaginative and kind of dark, but not in a bad way, more in like it was like a funny dark. This is Nicholas Was. It's like 1 page long, but it's really funny. I would reread these. Okay, so this one's very similar, but this is called Snow White, Blood Red, and this is edited by Ellen Datlow and Terry Windling. Okay, so this one's described as being a collection of modern fantasies that evoke the light and dark elements of classic fairy tales. So it's a collection of writings from a smattering of different fantasy writers. I personally did not enjoy this book very much. I felt it was a little bit dark for my taste, so I think I would throw that one right there. Okay, so next is The Dubliners by James Joyce. I really enjoyed this whole thing, but I especially love The Dead, his short story, The Dead. Yeah, I really love that short story. It's probably one of my favorite short stories of all time, but I've reread it multiple times, and I think I wrote an essay on it in college, and I'd reread that and put it there. I'm trying to preserve the top spots for ones that are really, really blowing my socks off. Unforeseen is a collection of short stories by my thesis advisor, Molly Gloss, and this one really focuses on kind of like fragments, short stories and fragments that have to do with what it means to be human. It's very subtly rendered depictions of people's lives, whether past, present, or future, and they are very grounded in the characters' experiences and detail. I thought this was a really beautiful collection, so I think I would put that one. I think it's earned a hallowed place upon my shelves. So these ones I'm going to review at once, but this is The Shell Collector and Memory Wall by Anthony Doerr. So these are kind of what he started out with. He started out as a short story writer before he moved on to novels. Yeah, so The Shell Collector has a lot to do with people's relationship to the natural world, has a lot of themes of love and separation and change, whereas Memory Wall obviously has a lot to do with memories and time. So it's kind of an interesting thematic difference, but I really enjoyed both of these. I think I'd put them both right there. So love his writing, absolutely incredible. All right, so next up we've got poetry. This category is going to be the shortest of them all. I only have 3 to share with you today. First of all, we have The Historians by Yvonne Boland. So I first encountered Yvonne Boland when I was studying abroad in Ireland. I really love her writing, and I really love how she tells such beautiful stories through her poems, and there's always that turn that is like the light bulb moment at the end of the poem. I've memorized a handful of her poems, and I'm sure I'm gonna try to incorporate a couple more of these into my memorization as well. So the next one is The Four Quartets by T.S. Eliot. This book is a masterpiece, and the only reason it wouldn't be 5 stars for me personally is because I really don't feel like I've done a deep dive into the depths of meaning in this poem, or in these 4 poems. I really want to do like a class on this or something so that I can really figure out, I don't know, I love the poem just for itself, but I don't feel like I have a full understanding of everything that's in here. It's just such a rich text. So the next one is Beowulf. I read the Seamus Heaney translation, which I really enjoyed. I know some people don't like that one. And of course, there's always the, classic J.R.R. Tolkien version, but I don't know, it's just this one holds a really special place in my heart. The dragon in this, does it get better than the dragon in Beowulf? It's just like the original hero myth, so what's not to love? Yeah, I'll put that in that category. There we go. Alright, so next up we're going to be diving into all the books that I read about the craft of writing itself. There were many. If you're a writer, you're going to want to watch this part because these are incredible, incredible books and are really going to help you. We'll start with 2 of them that I don't have a lot to say about, so we can get on to the good stuff. First of all is The Artist's Journey, which is on making art and being an artist. I enjoyed this one, but I didn't feel like it was very grounded in practicality. It felt very validating about, like the elusiveness of the creative process. It felt good to have somebody articulate it, but I don't know that I really took a ton away from this book, as evidenced by the fact that I can't remember a whole lot about it now. And another one which didn't really stay with me too much was The Gift of Presence by Carolyn Welsh. This is just like a mindfulness guide for women. This was like, I guess I should rephrase that this is kind of like all the nonfiction that I read, so most of it has to do with the craft of writing. This one didn't at all. It was just about trying to be present. Yeah. We'll put it in one and done. I don't feel like I would reread that one. First, we gotta start with a classic, which is On Writing by Stephen King. This is genuinely one of the best writing craft books that you can find. It's kind of part memoir, but then it really dives into the nuts and bolts of writing near the end of it. So I feel like the two biggest takeaways for me from this book were his biggest encouragement is just show up to the desk to write regularly. No matter how you're feeling, just make it a habit, somewhere with no distractions, and just write regularly every single day if you can. It's really simple, but it's also very encouraging. Like, that's really all it takes. And then I also really liked his rule of thumb for revision, which is that the second draft equals the first draft minus 10%. When you go about revision, you need to be cutting about 10% of your work from the first draft. The next one is called Thrill Me, Essays on Fiction by Benjamin Percy. So this guy was actually on the faculty at the MFA program years back, and so this was recommended by my first semester advisor. But this was it's so nuts and bolts. This is all about storytelling, and pretty much he has like craft talk style essays on pretty much any subject you can think of. There's like urgency, iconic scenes, violence, suspense, modulation, the art of the reversal, activating setting, meaningful repetition, revision as renovation. So anyway, a lot of wisdom in this book and a lot of incredible craft ideas that helped me in the art of storytelling itself. So highly recommend this one. So On Writing and Thrill Me, those are both there, I'd say. Refused to Be Done by Matt Bell. He was also part of the Pacific MFA faculty for a long time. This book is such a helpful guide to revision in general. Like, if you don't know where to start with getting your book done, and then like if you want just an actual blueprint or map of what it looks like to write your book from beginning to end, this is what you need. And it's a super thin little book. You can get through it really quickly. But basically his advice distills down to like 3 steps of the entire writing process from beginning to end. Is basically he recommends you do 3 drafts. So first you write the story, second you write what you mean, and third you write it well. So those are kind of the 3 overarching like drafts that you need to go through before you can really be done with a novel that you're proud of. I would definitely reread that, mostly for motivational purposes. The next one is similar. It's The Craft of Revision by Donald Murray. I first read this in my final semester in undergrad. It's just such a great nuts and bolts guide to the actual act of revision itself. It's a very, very helpful guide. So a few tips that I learned from this one is never go a day without writing a line. Know tomorrow's task today. So before you end today's writing session, make a plan for what you're going to do when you jump back into the work tomorrow. And then the third tip was keeping a day book, which is just like a journal where you capture any windward ideas and just kind of like a brain dump place where you can, any and all inspiration that comes to you, you can just put it in one central place. So this is a really, really great guide to writing. Yeah, I put that there. Okay, and then the last one that has specifically to do with writing is Steering the Craft by Ursula K. Le Guin. Again, this is just like a master class on the kind of like the hardest parts of writing, which are the, like punctuation, grammar, syntax, verbs, point of view, voice. Really good. This is a master class. Slide that one right up there. Okay, we're running out of room. So these last 4 books also hold a really special place in my heart because even though they don't have to do with the craft of writing, they do have a lot to do with the craft of art in general and the role of being an artist, especially a Christian artist in today's world. If any of you guys enjoyed my last video, which was all about why you're still haunted by the Lord of the Rings and why fantasy leaves us homesick, these books have a lot to do with that faith and art crossover that I was talking about. So we'll start off strong with Adorning the Dark by Andrew Peterson. So this subtitle is Thoughts on Community, Calling, and the Mystery of Making. So Andrew Peterson is kind of a literary hero of mine. He founded the Rabbit Room, which is this really cool artist community based out of Nashville. But he also wrote the Wingfeather Saga, which is this 4-book fantasy series that I loved growing up, that my family read it aloud together, and it was just a really beautiful story. So this is just a collection of essays that has a lot to do about, community calling and the mystery of making. I can't put it any better way, but it's a really, really beautiful, it's a really good book. And I would say that's earned a hallowed place upon my shelves. The next one is very similar. It's called This Homeward Ache by Amy Bakley. How our yearning for the life to come spurs on our life today. So again, if any of you guys resonated with my recent video about fantasy and why it leaves us homesick, this is a really great exploration of that strange, what C.S. Lewis called joy, but that kind of Sehnsucht longing for a world that's just beyond this one, that we can kind of sometimes glimpse through art and books and stories. But this is a really interesting one because it's mostly a memoir, so it's a lot of personal essays interweaving these reflections on stories that have shaped her as a person. So Amy Bakeley is super cool. She's actually a member of the Anselm Society, which is based in Colorado Springs. The Anselm Society, also kind of heroes of mine, their motto or their mission is all about a renaissance of the Christian imagination. So it's like just kind of a renewing of stories like The Lord of the Rings and Narnia that are really impactful, beautiful stories that are steeped in everything that's true and good and beautiful. So this is a beautiful book if you're interested in learning more about that. Homeward longing, as she says. So this is another book that's kind of in that same rabbit room realm, but this is called Art and Faith, A Theology of Making. It's actually more about like visual arts and painting, but it weaves in all different kinds of art forms. Loved that one. And then the last one, this is a new all-time favorite book of mine, but this is called Rembrandt is in the Wind by Russ Ramsey, Learning to Love Art Through the Eyes of Faith. So what I love about this collection of essays is it's all about learning to love celebrated pieces of art by learning the stories of the artists who made them throughout history. So obviously, like, you'll recognize most of these, but so he talks about Michelangelo, Caravaggio, Rembrandt, Vermeer, Van Gogh, Tanner. Just a really incredible survey of some of the most beautiful pieces of art in history. You just learn to love them better because of what was happening in the artists' lives as they were making them. So really insightful reflections on faith and kind of the innate human desire for meaning and the search for meaning throughout our lives. My favorite essay in this entire collection is on the David, Michelangelo's The David. I was reading it on the plane ride over to Florence before I was going to go see the David myself for the first time, and I cried, real tears. It was the best thing I'd read almost all of last year. So that's another one that I'm really looking forward to doing a video essay on really soon, but oh my gosh, so good. If you don't know the real story of the David and how it came to be, read this book and find out. It's so good, so beautiful. I'm gonna put Art and Faith in the reread, this Homeward Ache in the reread, and then I'll put Rembrandt is in the Wind right there. So my camera keeps overheating, so I made myself a matcha, and I'm gonna go ahead, this tier list is getting a little crowded, so I'm gonna go ahead and clear the whole thing, and then we're gonna do a version that's just for the fantasy books. So, but how do I do that? Can I reset? No! That's fine. Hang on. Hey friends, so this video is becoming ridiculously long, so I'm gonna go ahead and break it into two parts. So part one, which you just watched, that'll cover all the literary fiction, poetry, short stories, nonfiction. But then part two is gonna cover all the fantasy books that I read for the MFA program. That video will go live a day after this one does. So if that sounds like your cup of tea, I'll go ahead and link that up here somewhere. And if you've read and have thoughts about any of the books that we talked about today, please comment those down below. I think that's all for today, so I will go ahead and see you guys in part two.